Here we go. Nikita, how are you? How's life?
Doing good. Good. It's a lovely day. Feeling good.
Very cool. So it's been almost 12 months actually since this whole COVID era started, at least here in California. Um, I believe like almost when was it early March?
Yes,
Kind of we
yeah,
started with the
yeah.
lockdowns here.
Yep.
So how have you been coping as far as the, I guess, personal life goes, and the business has it been affecting you in any shape or form?
Yeah, I mean it certainly affected me and the family. My business not so much because I've been working remotely for the past 6 years or so. Nothing's really changed on that front. I have my home office, business as usual. Personal level, definitely a different story. We're stuck at home. Our daughter is 5 years old, needs to get out, play with friends. That thing has become a lot more complicated. Obviously, can't go out to restaurants and things like that, and can't see friends as much. It's been tough. It's been tough, but I think overall there's a silver lining to this. We've learned to cook really well, and late
I hear that a
lately
lot.
just yeah, going to a restaurant is just not as exciting anymore. Like we go there and sit around and we get the food, and it's like, is this the same dish that we've ordered last time that we really liked? It's nothing special about it. So it's been interesting. I don't know if it's good or bad, but definitely cooking skills have improved.
So do you like what type of cuisine, or what do you like to cook?
Oh, I mean, we're just all over the place, really. Starting from Italian, French, the Western foods, and been lately getting into a lot of Asian foods.
Wow.
Been doing a lot of stir fries. We've learned to cook Thai food really well. We got ingredients, the right ingredients, are shipped over, so these dishes have started to taste really authentic. Been doing some pho, Vietnamese soup.
Oh, I love pho.
It's just on another level, yeah. And then just even going so far as to make our own sushi, and a lot of Peruvian food as well, the
Oh,
ceviches and
wow.
things like that. So we've been just like going country by country, man, just dabbling into everything. And oh, Scandinavian food as well recently.
Interesting. I have not
Yeah,
had Scandinavian yet.
yeah, we watched a whole series on Scandinavian cooking, and you think of Scandinavian food. In some ways, it's got a lot of similarities with Russian food. It's those
Hmm.
same ingredients, super basic, but the modern take on the cuisine has been really interesting, and some cool stuff for sure.
Very cool. So
Yeah,
you are originally from Russian Federation. You are,
that's
I
right.
guess, born and raised
Born in
where?
the USSR.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. Actually,
Yep.
I was there the first time I went to that region or that part of the world was during the Soviet Union many years back. Where did
Yeah.
you grow up, or where were you born? Which part of Russia?
Yeah, so I'm from a small town, really, kind of middle of nowhere. Think about Russia; it's enormous, and
The massive
this is
country, yeah.
yeah, that part where I'm from is considered it's called the central part. It's not really the center geographically speaking, but is not Siberia, and it's not nowhere near Moscow. So they just say it's central part. Well, the town that's closest to me that some people might recognize is called Ulyanovsk, and that is the birthplace of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin,
Oh, wow.
whose last name is actually Ulyanov, hence the name of the town. Yeah,
Interesting.
they also make the Russian SUV out there. It's called Wazik, which is just terrible. But that's what that's what the country's had for ages, and they still do. They still do build these cars. They're still as bad as ever, but that's where they make them. Yeah, that's where I'm from. The Volga River is out there. I mean,
Okay, I
Volga
was
is
gonna
kind of
ask. So that's Volga River because I see here in
Volga
Google
River. Yeah.
Maps. So okay, that's
Yep.
what flows through.
Yeah.
How big is Ulyanovsk?
I'd say Ulyanovsk is about. I'm not sure what the population is these days, but I'd say it's like 500,000 people. My town
Oh wow.
is not that big. It's about 150,000.
Hmm.
I mean, I guess by American standards, it's not a small town, but it is by Russian standards. So
And did you? So you were born there. You went to, I guess, elementary school over there too, or high school.
yep, yep. Yeah. So I
Okay.
was born there, and I'd actually lived in Moscow for the first 5 years of my life. My dad was going to grad school, and so we had a little tiny apartment in Moscow, so he'd go study, and would me and mom would stick around. So I went to kindergarten in Moscow, and then we moved to our town after that. Um, and then yeah, just I started going to school there all the way through high school. Basically, is
So
how
you
long
finished
I've
high
stayed.
school
Yep,
in
finished high school.
Ulyanovsk. Hmm.
Yep, and then left for the U.S.
So how is the, I guess, the education system on that level? Because I know when basically started at high school in former Yugoslavia, and we had a system to
Hmm.
where in high school you basically decide kind of your future, maybe profession or career. So I went to,
Hmm.
basically it's not like a general high school like here. It's more like focused on mathematics and I guess informatics as they
Hmm.
called it at the time, or computer science. uh, did you, or does Russia have a similar system in place? Or I guess
Yeah,
what was your schooling experience in Russia?
yeah. It is similar to some extent. So it was it was kind of interesting because I'd started going to school around the time when the country was trying to figure itself out after the Soviet Union had ceased to exist, and they had kind of started adopting this system of where okay, you just had public schools, but then each school kind of came up with their own system as far as like what directions you get to choose. So you didn't get to choose your classes or anything like that. Like here in the US, you would, pick whatever class you want to go to, and or maybe to some extent, right? Over there was kind of a preset curriculum, but you did have several directions that you could take. So you could do like humanities, you could do math, you could do chemistry, biology. I think there was one more in there too. So I was in the math kind of direction.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was heavily mathematics, physics, informatics, as you said. Yes, that's
Yeah,
exactly what we called it. It didn't used to be called computer science. That was only a term I learned about when I came to the US.
same
Yeah,
here.
so we did some programming in Basic and Pascal, and that was all exciting. And then yeah, just a lot of math, really, some really hardcore stuff because they actually prep you for attending a university after you graduate. And in order for you to get into a university, if you want to get into a public university, which a lot of the good ones are public, you have to pass these entrance exams, and there's a series of exams that you have to do. So if you're going for a technical degree, it will have to be some sort of math test, maybe a physics exam, and then they give you like a Russian exam, which is you write a paper or something like that. So there will be multiple of these that you have to do, and those math tests that you have to go through, they vary in complexity depending on which university you're going to. The top ones were extremely challenging, and you had to be really grilled through high school in order to be able to do that. So that's kind of what they prepped us for, and it's funny because I did actually pass the exams to one of the universities, but then I ended up going to the U.S. and to college, and
And how did that
and it
happen?
actually. Oh, well, so my aunt,
Mhm.
had immigrated here to the U.S. Way earlier in the '90s, and she basically got married here, and she'd been in the country for some years now, and we just kind of thought, okay, maybe we'll get a student visa, and you go study abroad. So that's exactly what happened. We got a student visa to attend a community college in Illinois, where my aunt lived. So I kind
So
of
this was
actually
like
stayed with her.
mid to early 2000s, right?
Yeah, it was early 2000s.
Okay.
I'd come to the U.S. Yeah, like in 2002. So that's when
So
I applied for college and all that.
so how was your I guess sort of have a similar background. Like how was your experience just kind of flying from, I'm guessing, like through Moscow and then landing to maybe Chicago? I'm not sure where you landed.
Yeah,
How was that feeling when you first kind of hit the tarmac and you're on a different
yeah.
side of the world in a whole different society, different culture,
Oh,
different everything?
yeah, it was good actually. I should say that this wasn't my first trip to the U.S. When I applied to college, this was actually my fourth time to the country. So the first time I came over, I was about 11 years old, and this was my like very first exposure to the United States. And I was just a kid back then, of course. So I loved it. I
Mhm.
When you're that young, the language comes easy to you. You don't even think about the anxiety that we adults now face, having to converse in a foreign language. So I had a blast, and then I came a couple times after that. So I've been to the country, I've been to the area. It wasn't a huge change for me, but um, I guess the one thing that was different when I finally kind of moved to the country was that, okay, this was I knew that was this was going to be long term, and it's no longer I'm not going to have the same experience I had when I was a kid. So I didn't know what to expect, honestly, and
Hmm.
I just you know uh, it was very nice to be able to stay with a relative, so I wasn't like completely thrown into the river and like go swim. I had someone that knew the country, that could help me along the way, and it was huge. That
Yeah,
really
that
helped me.
always helps. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so you said you started in so you basically finished high school in Russia, came here, started community college,
Yep.
and then at some point, well, I guess, did you study engineering or computer science at the community college? It was just more kind of broad sort of
Yeah, I had
education.
come in. Yeah, I come into the country. I knew exactly what I was going to do. It was always going to be computer science. I've been, into technology since I was a little kid, and in Russia we had this big hacker culture, which I'm sure people will
Mhm.
will understand that this is how it is, or maybe they don't understand. But that's one thing is this hacker culture is huge. You have magazines, you have hacker magazines that are sold, and they would actually publish things that are like, here's how you crack this, here's how you can crack an ATM, here's how you can spam a phone call, here's how you
Mhm.
can break a website. And I'd read all these things, and I was just always fascinated. I thought it was extremely cool. And
So let me
yeah,
just touch on that a bit. So I
yeah,
was
yeah.
just gonna ask, is that like kind of white hat or black hat
I
hackers? I
mean,
guess
they
both
don't
or
really. Okay, so
distinguish.
when they
Yeah.
publish this stuff,
Yeah.
they always have a disclaimer, this, please do not try this at home, etc., etc. But the information that they published was extremely useful for whatever purpose you want to use this for. If you just want to, try out your skills and do this, you could do it, but you could also use this for malicious purposes, just the same. They didn't really um, emphasize what direction you should take this knowledge into. And it was just like, here's how you do it, and whatever you want to do with this is up to you.
That's very interesting. So
So
this is
yeah.
fairly widely spread, meaning like bunch of
Hmm.
kids that are getting into programming can kind of learn just programming by
Yep.
following what's in these publications.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't all malicious, of course. This is just
Yeah,
one
of
area that
course.
I was always fascinated with. But they'd sell this in every bookstore and in every you know every little shop, convenience store. You have these magazines, but then there was kind of a big IT culture in Russia. Like everybody would learn to program from an early age. It was a thing, especially if you're in like a technical field, or I guess if you have an interest in math, it was kind of implied that you'd be you go into computers at some point, and everybody would there were all these books out there, learn Visual Basic, learn Visual Studio and C++, and all these books out there that you could just buy, and they would just essentially teach you through tutorials how to code. Of course, it's cool, as you probably remember as well. They don't teach you the modern technologies. We learned Pascal. I mean, who uses Pascal?
Yeah.
Even back in the day, nobody used Pascal. It was just like, here's how you code. These are some constructs that you can use in this language, but you never really would use it in real life. So
What
school
did you
didn't really
guys use
prep.
like at the time? Like my I'm older than you, so my experience kind of starts back in the 80s when like
Hmm.
I started like somewhere in mid 80s on Commodore 64, also with BASIC. But what did
We,
you use in
yeah,
Russia? Like
I mean, even
what
though there's a bit of a
computers?
time difference, it didn't
Yeah.
really, the technology was so far behind. We'd used, I think our first machines in our school were 286s or 386, IBM 386,
Oh wow.
and it was just QBasic, quick basic
Hmm.
initially. Then we have Pascal, but it never went beyond that. Honestly, like we never got into the C++ and the other things. It was just, and certainly I think they installed Windows. um, I don't honestly don't remember when that was, but they've upgraded their entire um, all of their computers. They got new hardware, and that's when they installed Windows, and that was like towards the end of my time there. So it was kind of they didn't really keep up with the technology. Let's put it that way.
Did Russia at the time, were these actually IBM machines or were they clones like
Oh,
replicas
I
of
think
some sort?
that's a good question. I mean, I have to say they were probably the real deal.
Mm-hmm.
I knew a lot of these computers. They had actually, I mean, I don't think they've purchased them through the US. I think they had purchased them through either Taiwan or Japan or Korea. Like that's where a lot of the IT equipment came from. And I mean, I don't know if any of that was official, but it was super common to have these hardware fairs. You go to a bigger city like Moscow, for example, or even in Ulyanovsk, they had something like that where you come in and this like warehouse looking venue, and you have all these vendors sitting around with their little booth set up, and they have a whole bunch of hardware that you could just buy off of them. So a lot of the computers were purchased that way, and in fact they would essentially be able to build stuff for you on the spot. Like you tell them the specs you want, they'd have these price sheets. You come up to one of the booths and be like, okay, here's the I want this CPU, I want this motherboard, I want the this graphics card, and they put it together for you, and you have a system. So that's how a lot of the IT stuff worked back then.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that I mean we both have been living in the Bay Area or Northern California, the kind of Silicon Valley, I guess, for some of the listeners that don't know what Bay Area is, but and we both been in this industry for a while, so you work generally you have software engineers from every part of the world, almost every
Yeah.
country in the world. But Russian engineers, they were throughout my experience, and many other people have said the same, is definitely some of the best. And it's kind of interesting that even though after the Soviet Union things kind of fell apart, there wasn't
Hmm.
enough probably resources, money, etc. But the schooling, I don't know if it's the schooling or just the culture, but something is just keeps on pumping some
Yeah,
really top engineers, like from hedge funds that are in sort of like financial services to Silicon Valley to
yeah.
everywhere else.
I mean, yeah, I think it's a lot of it's a combination of things, but I'd say there's a culture of knowledge that I had experienced personally. I don't think it's quite the same these days, but certainly was back in my day. Like it was assumed that you would want to, better yourself in whatever field you choose. So you had you always had this drive that I got to do better in this or that, and certainly in technical fields there's been a lot of from back from the Soviet days, a lot of really smart people had stayed in the country, and a lot of them left, but some have stayed, and those that have stayed have kind of perpetuated this culture of knowledge and have kept the level of education quite high, certainly through middle schools and high schools, and definitely the universities. And so that's why I think the level of technical education, even though they might not have taught you the latest and greatest in computer science, they give you solid fundamentals in mathematics and physics and the technical science fields. And then on the other hand, so that's on one hand, this kind of culture of knowledge, and then on the other hand, there was the scrappiness, of an average person, because you'd lived through Soviet Union. It was all you were always in survival mode, because
Mhm.
there's been perpetual deficit in the stores. Like, you couldn't buy stuff that you wanted. It's not like what we have here now. You go on Amazon or you go to a supermarket, you see everything that you want. So there's always this deficit of everything, whether it's food, clothing, electronics, what have you. So a lot of people adapted to that, and it's just the scrappiness was unreal. People would learn how to build their own radios from scratch because you
Wow.
couldn't buy one, like, so you had to
Yeah.
actually build one. You go to a store, electronics store, you get the components, and you get um, a soldering iron, and you put it together, and you build other things like that. And that was the same way with computers. You wanted to you build your own computer. You could then, and then you start learning how to program because you wanted to build some software that you wanted. And so this kind of scrappiness has been throughout the population, and I think that's in part what contributed to the overall level of engineering. Like, if you want it, make it yourself. There was no other way. So you
Yeah.
had to learn. You had to learn. If you didn't, you'd be missing out. So it's just kind of implied that, okay, this is what you do.
So how was the transition then when you came to United States? You went to I guess from the high school to community college in US, and then you got your
Yeah,
bachelor's and master's at University of Illinois.
University of Illinois. Yep.
How was that transition from one education system to another? Obviously on a different
Yeah.
institutions, etc. But from the
It was.
perspective of
Yeah.
learning and colleagues and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. Well, I remember I was, by the time I finished high school, I was a total geek. I spent all my time in front of the computer. And I remember coming to the community college and seeing like this computer lab they had there. And it was nothing special really. It's a community college, so I realize it now, but back then I was like, wow, they got all these machines, and it's these huge monitors, and there's like, and I booted one up and I looked at the specs, and I was like, holy, this is great. this is a serious machine. So I would just spend all my time coding away and doing whatever I had time in between classes. And then I eventually got a tutoring job doing math, being a math tutor, which was a whole other story. But it was awesome. I'd enjoyed um, the abundance of technology and uh, just the overall, how should I put it? I mean, it's kind of like, if you're a kid and you go to your parents' house and everything's so nice and shiny, and that, that's how it felt. It was sort of oh wow, there's all this stuff, and it all works, and I could buy this or that, or I could use the resources that the college provides, and it was just insane. And then, of course, when I went to University of Illinois, that was just magnified times 10, because obviously it's an established school. They have a lot of sponsors. So the computer labs they had there was just mind-boggling. And well, that's just the material stuff, if you will. But then the education system, it was it was good. I had really a lot of difficulty grasping the concept that you actually choose your own curriculum to some extent, and that was difficult for me to understand how that whole thing worked, and it was super confusing at first. I eventually got a hang of it, but
So
that
what did
was
you
like.
choose to do? So this was in the master's program, right? And as a matter of fact, I just before we start
Mhm.
talking, I was just doing a bit of research, and I knew that University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, I guess, is one of the top computer science university or schools
Yeah,
in the US. But according to the latest uh, rankings that I've seen, it's like a top 5 graduate school for computer
yeah.
science. So obviously, it's a great school. And I'm just kind of curious, like, what did you end up doing for your master's program? What types of
um
technologies were you focused on?
yeah, so in the master's program, well, first of all, they have been a pretty high ranking school for quite some time, even back when I gone there. um, Certainly the engineering field is well respected there, and there's quite a bit of sponsorship that happens. Like when I was there, they had just built this Siebel Center, and of course Siebel is the
Oh wow.
yeah. So he was one of the sponsors there, and it was just I don't even know the word to describe it honestly. But like when you went into that building, of course now by today's standards, it's just it's like a fancy office, but to us college students, having something like that was just insane. And so that's where we had our computer science classes. That's where they took place, and they had these fancy labs and all this cool looking furniture, and yeah, it was great. But as far as the curriculum, I'd actually minored in mathematics, and this minor doesn't really count for anything as far as I know. I just really liked the format of the classes, and I really enjoyed the lectures. And so I had always been interested in math, and I kind of continued that as I was doing my computer science degree. But as far as the technologies, my one of my favorite things has been programming languages and compilers. Just learning about what is a language, um, what are the how do you build one, how do what are some of the major differences in these languages, and how they evolved throughout the years. And it's actually interesting to see that some of these concepts that have been introduced back in the early days, like functional programming, at some point that kind of all went away, as soon when C and C++ it became popular, and then eventually Java. All that functional programming stuff kind of took a backseat to these other technologies, and now it's come
Was
back full
Scala around back
circle.
then? Or
Yeah, it was. It
okay.
was. Yeah, even Lisp. I think we'd learned some Lisp
Mhm.
in one of the classes. We get still, think about all those parentheses that you had to put. Um, yeah, so that was definitely one of the areas that I really enjoyed. I did some data mining, data mining classes. So that was also a lot of fun. It's very, kind of close to databases, but different to some extent. So this is how your data warehouse is built, essentially. How does it function under the hood and stuff like that. Of course, these days we just say data warehouse, and it's
Yeah.
there's all technology that goes into building what it is. And um, now, of course, hardware is super cheap, and you've got the distributed computing is just everywhere. Back then, it wasn't necessarily the case, so you had to be creative with how you use the hardware. You had to be really careful with resources. Um, and then, yeah, I actually did some distributed systems coursework, which I've also found fascinating. So that was, yeah, that was a fun class. I think those were the highlights, honestly. I mean, I've taken
Mhm.
a ton of courses because you had to for even for your 4-year degree, and then eventually the master's degree beyond that. Actually, my master's degree, it was a little bit fuzzy. Oh, one other thing was algorithms, data structures. That was also a favorite topic. It was the hardest topic by far because that one class had a reputation for being just notoriously difficult, and it definitely lived up to its reputation. But because it was so difficult, it actually I've come to enjoy it. It's one of those things that I've spent a lot of time on just because I had to, and then eventually
Yep.
kind of grew on me.
Yeah, very interesting. Did you so when I kind of got into the, I guess, business corporate world, as
Hmm.
a young computer science, or what student to a certain extent, uh, I started just by default or by pure chance working on an Siebel implementation. I'm wondering, did you have any,
Hmm.
if you, I don't know if you had any exposure at that time to Siebel technology, or it's they're kind of, well, I'm not sure what they had at the time, because I started like in 2000 when it was a little like desktop based. Basically, you put a disk and download it
Right.
and configure it. Did you at that time have any exposure to any of these kind of like enterprise software applications?
Yeah, I did towards the end of my time at the school. I was coming up to I think it was my senior year in my 4-year program, and um, the one thing I remember was applying for an internship in one of the companies in Chicago, and this company is called Big Machines, and
Oh yeah,
they are of course well known in the Salesforce ecosystem, uh, and
they were acquired
and
by
I
Oracle a few years back, I believe.
they yes, exactly.
Yeah,
They've
yeah.
been bought, and they and I when I was talking to the people that interviewed me, I was really trying to understand what it is that the thing does, and they were like, well, our product is built on this or that, and I at the time I didn't realize what it was, but then of course. Uh, I knew later on what it was, and they were saying, okay, well, we do a lot of implementation work, and it's all JavaScript. I'm like, that doesn't sound very interesting at all. I don't think I want to do this job. So it wasn't, of course, when you're out of college, you learn about all these technologies. It's super exciting. Like you want to do, you know, uh, you know, supercomputers, and you want to do like all the cutting edge stuff, uh, and then and of course every student that was about to graduate, they all wanted a job at Google or Microsoft, because that's that always a kind of, or Amazon. They always associate them with like these are the big players that have all the coolest technology. So if you want to be a computer science guy or gal, then you go work there. And of course, I was a total misconception. And later on, I learned that that was just ridiculous. That they are not the only ones with technology, and technology is not the only thing that counts. And it's not, you know, um, Yeah, and then I've certainly adjusted my perception of the technology world. But yeah, my first exposure was big machines, and it was I didn't like what I saw, honestly.
And how did you I'm guessing maybe at some point you were in some shape or form introduced to Salesforce, because that's,
Yeah,
you landed at Salesforce at one point in your career, and you were there for quite a few years. How
yeah,
did that
yeah.
happen?
So that was also quite a long story, but in the interest of time, I'll keep it short. But so basically, I had a buddy and he was also from Russia originally, and he had been we like him and I have been almost on parallel tracks, basically taking all the same classes, doing all the same things. He had introduced me to my future employer, who was that was at NCSA. So they had this National Center for Supercomputing Application, I think is the proper terminology, what they're called.
Mhm.
That's where they built the Mosaic browser, by the way.
Oh,
The very
wow,
first
interesting.
graphical
Yeah.
interface for a browser. So, and then that eventually became the Netscape browser, and so on and so forth. And you know the story from there.
Yep.
But yeah, so that's where they had built that, and I was like, oh, cool. I can work there, and you had this supercomputer that you could run jobs on and stuff like that. Of course, I wasn't really, I did some of that, but I built a web application for them in Java, and that was my kind of my first real life project. And since I had become familiar with Java, we had career fairs going on at the school pretty much throughout the year, and so companies would come there. And it helped that University of Illinois was such an established school that you get good exposure to a lot of the companies. Certainly, all the big names and were there in this career fair. And one of those names was Salesforce. All of a sudden, they they started doing college recruiting, and that was their very first um, attempt to get some developers from college. And one of the schools, I think one of the I'm trying to remember. I think it was a manager on the API team back then in Salesforce. He had told them, "Hey, you should go to University of Illinois because that's where I went," and so they did. And I talked to them, and of course, my buddy had interned there, and he was like, "Yeah, this is. I mean, this is a CRM software. I didn't know what CRM was back in the day."
Hmm.
And so I told him, what do they do? Is it any good? He said, yeah, this is really cool. They have a lot of good technology. They're a Java shop.
What year was this when?
This was 2000. I want to say it was 2004 or 2005, something like that.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. I actually wasn't, that's when I was approximately introduced to Salesforce. So I kind of remember that the way their application looked back then. But yeah, so he
Hmm.
basically, your buddy introduced you to to the
Yeah, he
company and the
introduced me
product.
to the company. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
exactly. He told me about it because it wasn't one of the names that you would want to pursue. It's just they
Yeah,
weren't
especially
a
back
big
then.
player.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly not for a college student that wants to do cool computer sciencey stuff. It wasn't just on the list anywhere. You'd go for Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and like other firms like that are going to have you work on the computer sciencey stuff. But of course, that wouldn't necessarily be true. But that's what you thought, as that was the mentality. And then I had spoken to the representative there, which I think was his name was Chris Fry. I think he's probably not at Salesforce at this point. I'd venture he's long retired.
Hmm.
And yeah, and I really liked the conversation. And eventually they had invited me to an interview in San Francisco, which I like, okay, well, if I don't like it, I'll get a free trip out of it. Why not visit the West Coast? I've never been. So I
Exactly.
went, and I love the city, and I love the company. They were back then. They were on one market, right on the Embarcadero, right across from Ferry Building. They didn't have the
Yep.
Salesforce Tower back then. Of course, it was just
Yep.
They just had one building essentially, and it
They
was
had that
awesome.
no software logo or sign,
They
right?
had the Nav software
Somewhere.
logo.
Yeah, I
Yep.
remember
As you
that.
come into the One Market Plaza, it was the first thing you saw, Nav software. Um, yeah, I had a really good experience during that interview. There were a couple other people together with me, and one of them was also from University of Illinois, who I did not know, but we had met during the interviews. And they gave us a bit of a tour in the city, and it was all good fun. But yeah, so that's how I kind of ended up. I had another offer on the East Coast, which the company that I've interned with, and I decided, I've been to the East Coast. Let me do something else. Let me go to the West Coast, and it was, and I ended up staying
Yeah,
for
you've been here ever since.
been here ever
So
since and loving it.
yes. So what did you you know types of technologies or whatever you can, I'm not sure how much you can disclose, but in general, like I guess some of the listeners might be curious in general, because since we're kind of oriented around the Salesforce and Salesforce
Yeah,
ecosystem, I'm sure a lot of people want to know more, like what's inside, basically. What is
sure.
Salesforce as a company, as a group of
I
people?
mean, I think I can be. I mean, I think I'm okay in
At
talking
least
about
back
this
then.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because this a lot of time has passed, and I think things have
Mm.
changed. Um, but when you came in as a developer, you were really a full stack developer. There was like no other option. There was no concept of, okay, I'm just going to do the front end, or I'm just going to work on the back end databasey stuff, or just middle layer. There was none of that. You would come in, you had to know everything from SQL to the CSS, and you worked on all of those things. I mean, of course,
And
later
they're
on,
Java shop, right?
they are a Java shop. Yeah, they they
Yeah.
they have been for quite some time, and I don't think it's a secret to anyone that is the case. On the back end, again, I don't think it's a huge secret or anything. They've used Oracle for ages,
Yep.
so
That's well
Oracle
known.
database, yeah, and then they have a lot of PL SQL code. In fact, one of the first language that the developers gave, the Apex language as we know it today, was PL SOCL, because it's sort of like the inspiration was that it would would accomplish the same things that PL SQL would for Oracle. Like, it was a procedural
Hmm.
language that you'd use
Interesting.
in your triggers in the database, and you can write your stored procedures in. So that's kind of what Apex was initially. You thought main use case was you'd write a trigger. It's all kind of low level. And so yeah, so as a developer, you coming in, you had to know everything from that PL SQL language to the style sheets, and it was kind of crazy. You had you get a bug, and of course, initially when you start out, they just give you
So did
some
you
bugs.
did you actually
Uh-huh.
work with Java beforehand, or like did
Yes,
you
I
learn
did.
at
Yeah, yeah.
Salesforce? Oh, so you did.
No, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I did work with Java. I had that job at NCSA where I built an entire web application in Java. That was quite a learning experience for me. But I was pretty good at C++ before that. I did a ton of my own coding projects that I knew C++ fairly well. It was a fairly easy to transition to Java from C++. And then of course, I had some experience in the field. So that's, I came into Salesforce being proficient in Java, but of course, having to learn their huge code base and learning to properly code as you would in the enterprise environment, and was of course something that had to have happened, and it did. It was you when you're a developer working on little projects, it's one thing, but then you come in with 100 other people working on a piece of software, it's totally different. And I'd
So
gotten
how
introduced
many
to the concept.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
how many employees did Salesforce have at the time?
I
Like how
think
big was the company overall?
I know that the R&D organization, and that included development, QA, managers, and DevOps, and database people. That organization was right around 200 people. So it
Oh,
was
okay.
not
But
it was sizable. Salesforce had become an established player, but they were not at the stage that they would later on get to be,
yeah,
where this no software concept was moving along really well, but it wasn't. It hasn't become ubiquitous.
yeah.
They were still trying to shift people's mentality to what you could do on the cloud. So it was, I think overall maybe it was less than 1,000 people at that time, like including everybody.
So it was a much smaller organization at the time. Did you
Oh
actually?
yeah.
I'm guessing you ran or saw at least Parker Harris.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, our where my first desk was on the 8th floor, and that was where Mark Benioff's office was. He had a kind of a corner section blocked off. He had the conference room in there, and you'd see him all the time walking around.
Mhm.
You run into him in the elevator. Parker Harris for sure, was there. Um, I oddly enough, I saw Parker way less than I saw Mark Benioff for whatever reason. Maybe it's being on the same floor had something to do with it, but that's just how
Yeah,
it was.
I never really read too much about Parker Harris. I did see him once at the Hiraku office, but I read quite a bit, including like a couple books that Mark Benioff published. And I know, that's well
Hmm.
known fact. He came from Oracle. Did like they
Yeah.
pull a lot of developers or engineers from Oracle, considering like,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oracle, PeopleSoft,
uh,
Siebel, yeah, pretty much. PeopleSoft was a big one. A lot of ex PeopleSoft. There was also a CRM company. I think they were bought by Siebel, if I'm not mistaken, and then yeah, and I don't remember the sequence of acquisitions that took place, but at some
yeah.
point there were all these PeopleSoft employees that just wanted a job, and Salesforce happily gave them that. So there were quite a
Yeah, I
few
think
of
there
them.
was like a hostile takeover of PeopleSoft, and that's actually
Yeah.
in Pleasanton. Actually, I used to work at the building next door, and now the founders, I forgot their names now, are the founders of Workday. So they end up, building
Right.
another great company. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
No, it
uh,
was it was some of those concepts that were at PeopleSoft, like the Apex language, I think was born part due to some of those employees. They wanted a proprietary language on the platform, and I think maybe even Visualforce to some extent. Don't quote me on that, but I think that a lot of the inspiration for the platform features that we know came from those days, from those people.
so that's interesting. So basically, there was PL Sokol, and then
Yep.
PeopleSoft
And
folks came in, and they had their own sort of maybe ideology or even technology that they maybe merged into PL Sokol, and then that's how, I guess, kind of loosely speaking, Apex was born.
Apex, yeah. So I think it was actually like PL Sokol was born from that from
Oh,
that
I see.
generation of PeopleSoft employees. Yeah, and then they didn't know what to call it, so they called it PL Sokol because they had PL SQL, and then you had SQL and Sokol, so it was just kind of a natural name that came about. And then later on, of course, marketing took over, and they had started churning their wheels, and they had come up with the name Apex. And then it was an Apex platform, was what they referred to the overall platform, which is we now know as Force.com. And I don't even know, maybe they come up with another name again. So
Yeah, it changes all the time.
yeah.
We're all as developers used to it by now. So, what types of, I guess, what did you spend about close to 9 years at Salesforce?
Yep.
Um, I'm guessing you worked on all kinds of stuff during those 9 years. Is there
Oh
anything
yeah.
kind of like, I guess, what was exciting to you? What was something that you enjoyed?
It was yeah, a few things actually. So I when I started off, I was just working on general stuff like anything and everything. You didn't really have well-defined teams back then. So well, we kind of had the API team that built the SOAP API. So that was one direction. And then there were a bunch of other teams that some of them worked on marketing features, some worked on sales, and then there was like the platform team. So believe it or not, that was it was just one team at that point, and they had worked on all the UI, the front end. They'd worked on custom fields, all the setup. They worked on just overall core engine of Salesforce and the framework that went into it. So I'd worked on initially worked on part of the reskin from the classic Salesforce. And I don't know if people know about this, but the classic Salesforce that you see today is not really the original interface. They had another interface before that that was, it was ridiculously old by the today's standards. So it would certainly look jarring. But they were trying to transition from that to what we now know as classic. And so I'd worked on that reskin for part of my time. Just making sure all the CSS was good and then all the markup was functioning properly. Of course, testing or fixing all the browser bugs and things like that. My second project was building an internal CPQ tool for Salesforce to use. And they had made the decision that this is now the time, like we're gonna build the stuff using our own technology. So our team was kind of the pioneers for using Apex and Visualforce. And
Wow, that's interesting.
yeah, it was a cool experience. There was no metadata API. One of the developers that was whom I really highly respect to this day, it was one of my mentors. He just like built the metadata API because we needed something to deploy code from source control. And so he like kind of put together the framework for it. And then eventually it evolved into a metadata API.
Wow. Huh. Yeah.
And yeah, so
yeah, we all
yeah,
use that often. The metadata
yes.
API.
Yeah, it is now a must-have if you're building it. I mean, all the IDEs use it, so it's certainly a necessity these days. But it's kind of crazy to think that it didn't exist at some point. And so they had actually developed this alpha version of metadata API for this project because we had to get things done. We had to keep code in the repo and then deploy it to all of our test environments and production environments. And then, of course, building an Apex, they had to add a lot of features to Apex in order to make it do what we had to do with it. Visualforce, like App Exchange, was built on Visualforce, the very, very early Visualforce, and they had to go through the same process. A lot of features had to be added, a lot of bugs had to be fixed. So I'd say half of the project was building features to the requirements. The other like 25% was figuring out how to deploy it, getting past through all the deployment errors and fixing the tools. And then the other 25% was fixing bugs in the platform. So that's what it was like. And
so
it
where
was
does
quite challenging.
Visualforce, I guess, what's the, I mean, I can see Apex, but Visualforce is sort of, at least to me, very unique. I don't see that in any other technology, something similar. I guess, do you know what's the history behind it? Or
It definitely has a history, and it's not a concept that Salesforce came up with. Well, first of all, back then it was called Apex Pages. So
okay, yeah, there's still like metadata that.
Yep.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Yep. Even now, like you go to Visualforce pages /Apex /whatever. So it's been Apex Pages for quite a while. And yeah, it does have a predecessor, which is called the Java Server Faces, or JSF, as it was abbreviated. And it is very similar. You've got your kind of markup, custom markup that will then get processed on the server side, and it will spit out the actual markup that is presented in the browser. And they had the same kind of concepts for, here's a post back, here's you call an action on the controller. So all of that was already built as part of JSF, and so Salesforce just took that and adapted it to become Visualforce. Like, of course, they had introduced their own tags and how the controllers worked and those sorts of things. And but a lot of it was already already out there. They had a team that I think it was literally like a couple developers that had built this, and of course it was a very early version. Later on, I had actually worked on the Visualforce team, kind of in the middle of my tenure there, and it was a mature feature by then. So yeah, that's where it originated from. A lot of the Java ecosystem had a lot of those things already built, and they weren't very well adopted. But Salesforce had kind of turned that around. They built their own technology based on that.
Very interesting. So what are some of the things before, I guess, the before your tenure ended with Salesforce, that you were
Yeah.
involved in?
So after this CPQ project, I got they had formed a security team, which was tasked with essentially a lot of things. It was a time where Salesforce kind of realized that okay, they could get hacked, and they have gotten hacked, and it was a big public scandal at some point, that there was a phishing incident, and they had really started doubling down on the platform security. And so our team was the first that kind of did that. So we had gone through and we'd fixed a lot of the cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, cross-site request forgery, built a our team had built SSO support. So SAML was one of the first things that was built, and then followed by OAuth, that was implemented in the platform. Identity confirmation that you probably everyone knows and loves, the thing that sends you an email with the code. That
Yep.
was a thing that I personally worked on, and was one of my first projects there. We had to refactor all the login code, or not the logging, but the login, the stuff that lets you into the system. We had to refactor that, and make it more manageable, because it was just a nightmare. They had portal, customer portal logins, partner portal logins, and back then there was no communities. It was just called partner portal, customer portal. So I worked on that. Then I eventually moved to a team called Sites team, so that worked on sites, and we had built the My Domain feature. How you can create a
Yep.
domain name for your organization. So that was another thing. Then I went to work for a Visualforce team, where we had built a bunch of stuff for the Visualforce engine. One of my projects was optimizing the compiler, to change it to use a different parser. And then we had a huge backlog of bugs to go through. And then eventually, after Visualforce, I had actually moved out of the R&D organization and went into the team called ProdSec, product security. So that was just this team was responsible for evaluating the platform from a security standpoint, and reviewing a lot of code, and building tools to automate penetration testing. Some of it was doing security reviews for App Exchange. So when you submit for a security review, there's this tool out there. I forget what it's called, but it's like the cloud scanner that you could submit jobs to, and it'll give you the results of the static analysis checks and a few other things. So I actually built the first version of that tool, that was using an external scanner, and it was built in the cloud on Heroku. So yeah, I think that things like that was actually my last project there, and then eventually I founded my own company after I'd left.
So you basically at some point said, this is enough, I'm done with working at Salesforce, and then you just really continued with the same technology, but you just became more
Yep.
of an independent, or at least a consultant of some sort.
Yep.
And
Exactly. I mean,
how was that
I've been.
transition?
It was actually not a very smooth transition, but it could have been. I mean, it could have been worse. So I had spent a lot of time at Salesforce. I've been to all these teams, and I've worked on a lot of things that I wanted to. And as I was there, I come to kind of like and respect the business side of things, not just the technology part of it. You know, it was kind of eye opening for me to see how technology that you build, like for you as a developer, or for me at the time anyway, it was just like, hey, I'm gonna write some code. It'll be really cool code. I'm gonna do my best. It'll be really fast. It'll work great. It'll be great code to look at. So I had kind of been in that mentality. I just, I want to do my best as an engineer. But it was kind of eye opening to see that, hey, this stuff that I'm building, people are using it and it's helping them, and it's accomplishing goals and it's driving their business. And so that was really cool perspective to kind of um, adopt. And eventually you know, um, I'd realized that, hey, I've been working on the platform. I know how to do this stuff. And it, some of the, and then, of course, I get friends that worked in the less technical fields, but they were close to the business. So they hit me up and say, hey, work at Salesforce. How do you do this and this? I'd tell them, you go to the setup, you do enable this permission. And so I kind of started doing this informal consulting, telling them how to use the platform, and eventually they started paying me for it. And then it then occurred to me, why I want to do this full time. This is great. I know this stuff. I think I can, help a lot of people. It was good money, so it just made sense to make that transition. And yeah, I had to learn a lot in the process, but it was great. One of the things, you can't stop moving. And
Exactly.
I felt like I've exhausted the engineering path, and I saw where it would eventually lead me to. And there's nothing wrong with that. You could go on to become an architect, and you know uh, or a super senior principal developer, that you make a lot of decisions and technical decisions, and it was great. But I thought I'd done enough of that, so I wanted to do something else, and so that's where it kind of went from there.
So you started, left Salesforce, you continued, working with the technology itself, helping other clients and with different implementations or in general technical problem solving to some sort in some shape or fashion. And then eventually you decided, and just kind of like to put a bit of a disclosure. So Nikita actually has a consulting company today. At the same time, you have another product company where you have developed a product which probably in some near future is going to be available. It's available today for everyone, and we're going to share more information with this podcast or where to find it and how to reach to Nikita in general. But you created a product that's going to be on App Exchange at some point in the near future. I
Yep.
guess how did that? So you went working with Salesforce consulting, and then at some point you said, "Well, I think there's some kind of a product need here that I just
Yep.
identified, and I'm gonna build it." I guess if you can
Yeah.
tell a little bit about that process.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was like you said, being a consultant for quite some time. You work with a lot of companies, and you eventually understand their pain points and learn how to help them. And I, always, since I was always technical and initially starting out, I wasn't very business focused, and I was learning about the business, but mostly been on the technical side of things. Even when I was doing consulting, so a lot of development, a lot of code, a lot of building UIs and things like that. So I was always deep into the development side of things, and and I always kind of try to keep up with what the platform is doing, and what are the tools out there that I can leverage. And as every time I go to do a project, and we build an integration, or we build something somewhat complex, there always be a need to create this, do some sort of logging, error handling, and you build this once, you build this twice, build this 3 times, 4 times. Eventually, it got to a point where, like, why am I doing this all the time? I should just build a package and that I can install into clients' orgs, and I could use it, save some time, save them the budget so they can, give me other work that's more relevant to the business. And so I built this package, and then eventually I thought, hey, this is missing from Salesforce. Tool set, a developer tool set. I mean, they've always been kind of a step behind on the developer tools. Certainly, they're trying to do their best in that area, and a lot of stuff is coming out. But this is one of the areas that had been neglected. While I was working there, we had, every major release, you as part of R&D had to be there watching for gags or exceptions as the release lands on the instance. And so then you would triage those exceptions and figure out if you need to do a patch or a hot fix, even if it's critical. So those tools were available to the internal developers, but they don't exist for developers that are working on the platform. And I always found that, to be kind of unfair. We as developers on Salesforce, we're not, we're in the same position. We want to make sure that org is doing good. We want to make sure the code that we're pushing isn't causing problems. And if it is, we want to know about it right away. Like, we don't have to wait for account executive to complain to us that they can't close an opportunity, or that a support rep to tell us that a case isn't getting created, because then you get hunted down in the middle of the night and you have to solve it right there. And part of it is for our own benefit, of course. We don't want to
Exactly.
we don't want to we want to have a life. We don't want to spend fixing issues. So that was missing, and that's how I started building this package, and eventually adding more features to it, adding some integrations. And at some point I just, well, hold on a minute, this is a product right here. Why don't I, make it formal? And that's kind of how it went.
So are you you're basically right now I think going through the security review, and
Yep.
probably in the near future you're going to have it a bit available directly in the app exchange.
Yep.
What would be, I guess, the best way for someone that wants to try the product itself? What would be the best way for them to find it or find you?
Oh, you can drop it at our website, https Pharos.ai. There's a contact form that you can fill out. Feel free to do that, or just shoot me a note. Hit me up on LinkedIn. We're happy to talk to our early adopters and have a discussion on what their needs are, and happy to give you the product to try out. We definitely will have a trial version, because I think one of the benefits to this product is you have to let it collect some data,
Okay.
and then eventually you will see that you get some insights from it, and you will see how it will be useful. So there's always I'm happy to talk you through the use cases, and just in general, like, understand what it is that you're trying to do. But I think if you're a developer, honestly, or if you're even an admin, or anyone that's doing anything on Salesforce, and even if you're not technical, you know how your org is doing, this is a great tool. Super easy to use. It gives you a lot of power if you want it. If you don't want it, it can just sit there and collect data and let you know when things are going bad. So it has multiple uses. But yeah, just drop me a note. I assume we'll have a contact, some
Yep.
sort of contact information. So yeah, drop me a note, email me, send me a text message, and hit me up on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat and give you a demo, and if you're interested, it's we'll install it in your org, or we give you a link and you can try it out.
Excellent. So we're gonna have the link wherever this podcast is being distributed and the link also to Pharos.ai, where you can get more information about the product, and also where you'll be able to reach out to Nikita, and then he can guide you through the process of actually installing it and trying it out. And I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks, Nikita, for the conversation. It was awesome. So I learned a
For
lot, as
sure.
I always do from you.
Thanks,
So
Luke, for doing this. Yeah, I really appreciate the
n-
time.
no problem at all. Thank you. So thanks everyone for listening.